Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of discovering how much being an Italian in Uruguay is feeling at home, in fact. So my presentation will be about public enterprises in Europe from a specific angle. I'm not going to present the history or the variety of experience of public enterprise in Europe, but what I would focus on is a simple question. Europe has been the battleground for a big experiment in the last 20 years. And the experiment was about privatization. So the question I would try to answer is whether when you compare public enterprise and private enterprises in Europe, consumers of specific services, when there is a public enterprise working in the country, are in a better position or are in a worse position. And to answer the question, what I will do is to give you a summary of a book that will be published next year, probably in June by Oxford University Press, which is in a sense the second part of a trilogy. The first one was a book with an analysis of privatization in Great Britain. This is about liberalization and comparison of public and private.
Y la comparación de empresas públicas y privadas en Europa. Y la tercera parte va a ser sobre empresas públicas en una perspectiva más global. Entonces, donde las empresas públicas, ¿dónde están las empresas públicas en Europa? Principalmente están en lo que la jerga de la Unión Europea menciona como servicios de interés general. Investigación y reclutamiento ocupacional, transporte público y ferrocarriles, servicios postales, telecomunicaciones, electricidad, gas, agua, educación, trabajo social y salud y administración pública y defensa. ¿Cuántas empresas públicas tenemos en Europa? Nadie lo sabe. De hecho, porque
as a silly result of privatization,
resultado de la
Eurostat, the statistical office of the European Union, doesn't record the information in a proper way. So we know that one part of services of general interest in Europe are delivered by public enterprises, but we do not know actually how much, at least in comparative terms.
Por lo menos en términos comparativos.
So instead of trying to go in depth of this, I will focus
en profundidad en este tema. Voy a enfocarme en mi pregunta.
The experiment
El experimento
in Europe was about
en Europa se trató de
privatizing,
privatizar,
particularly network industries
las industrias
such as
en red
telecommunication
como la
and
telecomunicación y la energía,
unbundling
despaquetar,
the network,
desempaquetar las
separating
redes,
the
separar
network from
a la red
operations.
de las operaciones.
This was compulsory.
Esto fue obligatorio para la mayor parte de las industrias, de
if you are
manera
an
que si
electric
ustedes,
company, you
si
cannot
era una
own
empresa
your grid, you
eléctrica,
have to
no se
sell
podía ser propietario de
grid.
la red,
If you
tenía
are
que
the
venderla.
owner
Si
of a gas
empresa era
company,
la
you
dueña
have to sell
fuera una empresa de gas, había que vender
pipelines to
las
somebody else.
cañerías de
So
gas a otra
was
empresa. Fue
really,
entonces realmente
pervasive experiment.
un experimento muy
And the third
profundo y
dimension was
generalizado. Y la
liberalization,
tercera
breaking
dimensión fue la
the
liberalización,
public
es decir,
monopoly.
desmembramiento del monopolio público. Para estudiarlo de una manera empírica, esta historia, con mis colaboradores tratamos de combinar diferentes ingredientes. Uno de ellos fue mirar las tendencias en la propiedad pública que son registradas por la OECD, which is an international organization very much in favor of privatization, with a scoring system where 6 means full public ownership, 0 means full private ownership, and you can see there the decreasing trend in different countries. This is, for instance, telephony. The green line is Italy.
En los diferentes países. La línea verde es Italia.
You can see the year
se puede ver el año
the former public enterprise
la empresa pública
Telecom Italia
fue privatizada completamente.
Similar
y de manera similar para otros países.
This is gas.
Este es el gas.
With a much stabler position of public ownership. Interestingly, in some countries there is a little bit of an increase of public ownership. One of the countries where there is an increase of public ownership in gas is one of the 2 members of the European Union that are actually producers of gas, and this is the Netherlands, which is very much a liberal country, but they have decided to acquire back
volver a adquirir
the pipelines that were a joint venture with Dutch Shell and BP. And electricity, again, you can find this decreasing trend in public ownership with important differences across countries. Okay, so we have this experiment in Europe. We diminished the importance of public enterprises, for instance, in these 3 sectors. Now, I will skip this. Now, the first thing that is interesting for consumers is the price they pay. So the simple question is, after you have public and private ownership in different countries in Europe, would you say that the prices are lower after privatization because privatization is more efficient than public enterprise? Now, if you believe that, you would expect that if you put in a scatter diagram as this, the individual countries, according the price consumer pay and the liberalization reform index, you would see something as a northwest-southeast line, meaning that in the north, in this context, you would have a situation in which the observation take a precise shape. They do not take this shape. Basically, it means that it is not true that in countries where telephony is managed by a public enterprise, consumers pay more. This is for telephony, this is for gas, and this is for electricity. So, this first evidence is negative. It says that privatization didn't deliver
lower price compared with public enterprise. This is perhaps too much descriptive. You'd like to be more analytic. But before going to the more analytic part of the presentation, let's do another thing and ask people what they think about the price they pay. And the European Union has a regular survey about consumer satisfaction on prices. Again, if you think that the reforms work, this is in fact a dissatisfaction, you would expect a pattern where dissatisfaction is higher with public enterprise and lower with private enterprise, and again, this doesn't work. It is not true that after privatization people are happier in the countries where, for instance, telephony has been privatized. This is for electricity, and there is similar evidence for gas. Now, let me be slightly more analytic. With my collaborators, we have collected all the evidence about prices over the years for international calls, national calls, local calls, connection charges in telephony. We have found some evidence that market structure do influence prices, but practically no effect of public ownership on prices, except for local calls. But even more surprising, we have found econometric evidence that for mobile telephone, when you have private ownership of the provider and you have competition, users pay more. They pay a higher price. And the same happens for gas. If you have a government-owned gas provider, you pay less. And for electricity, if you have an electricity provider, you pay less if it is a public enterprise. Now, when I sent the draft of this evidence, which is based on something as 6 years of work of 15 research collaborators, when we sent this to the referees of Oxford University Press, one referee said, but perhaps users pay more with private ownership because the quality is better. So the public enterprise offer lower quality. So we wanted to test this, and again, we did this in two ways. First, looking at consumer satisfaction, ask people whether they are happier in the country where there is a public enterprise or in countries where there is a private enterprise, and we find some evidence that particularly in gas and in electricity, but less in telephony, satisfaction is higher when there is a public enterprise. Now, you can think that people are biased, that consumers do not know what they say. So we have tried to test also whether, independently from consumers' opinion, there is some hard evidence that public enterprise are in Europe less effective than private enterprises in delivering the service. I will just mention this graph. This is for electricity, the relationship between the subjective evidence, what people say, and one quality indicator for electricity, which is an obvious indicator, and this is the unplanned interruptions of electricity, which is a very standard quality indicator. Okay? So in this case, the correlation is very high. So people know what they say. If they say, I am happy, it is because there is a low frequency of unplanned interruptions. This is the same for planned interruptions. And what's about public ownership? Well, unplanned interruptions are much less with public ownership. When there is a public enterprise, the number of unplanned interruptions of electricity is less than with privatized enterprises. Conclusion. Conclusion, we had this huge experiment in Europe involving 27 countries for over 20 years with directives from the European Union, national legislation, regulators, independent regulators, and so on. But what's clear in terms of conclusion is that if you try to privatize an industry which is a natural monopoly with inelastic demand, private monopolists will do what you would expect. They will raise prices, and they will get more profits. Even if you try to increase competition, because there is a monopolistic element in the industry, they are able to extract prices, and this doesn't match with concerns about security of supply, affordable pricing, quality of service, affordability for the poor. There is some evidence that for telephony, the divide between private and public ownership is not so material, is not so important, but for energy, it clearly is, in a sense that public enterprise offers energy at lower price. This has very important consequences for the poor. Even if Europe is one of the richest areas of the world, there are poor in Europe. When you raise price, you create a situation of difficulty. Our estimates are that there are at least 35 million people in Europe who are unable, after privatization, to pay their energy or water bills, which is a shame for a region as Europe. So our conclusion is that, in broad sense, the experiment failed. It would be totally misguided to try to imitate, for instance, in Latin America, what has been failing in Europe, while probably what Europe has to learn are more creative and interesting way to revive public enterprise for the benefit of the society. Thank you.